Hi folks, I thought it would be fun to make a video showing how I go about making some sound effects, and in this case it's for a helicopter or a ornithopter as popularized in the film June. So let's just take a look at that before we go any further. So there we go. I'm going to use my favorite synth to make this sound. It's a synth called Vital, and it's completely free, as is the software that I'm using, Reaper, which is available to download. So this synth gives us a number of oscillators, three. Just make sure that they're turned off. Things can get quite noisy. And we have a sampler where we can also change the parameters there. And we've got a couple of filters. And the LFO section over here is how we actually shape the sound. So this is a really fun sound just to show how LFOs work in terms of shaping the actual basic sine wave we've got going here. So to start off with, I'm just going to modulate the volume of this basic sine wave. And I'm gonna aim for that characteristic chopper kind of sound. It's a little there's a little delay because I've got OBS running, so I just need to get used to that. So we're trying to mimic the shape of how the sound occurs in real life. And it might not be so triangular. I feel like it's got a slower kind of attack and a faster ramp at the end, which is perhaps non-linear, something like that. I've got a compressor running here just to smoothen out the sound as I make it. I'm getting some clipping, so I'll just keep the attack nice and fast. It gives it a certain tonality as well. That might actually come in handy, so I'll leave that there for now. I'm just looking to make the low portion of the sound now. I'm not actually looking to make the entire sound from one oscillator. It's just a bit of unison. It's like a chorus effect. I'll leave it off for now. The temptation when sound designing is really to overdo things. It's kind of like cooking, and I often have to stop myself from going in the wrong direction and keeping it simple, focusing on the basics before I start tweaking and experimenting, because that later stage can get really out of control and it can waste your time unless you've got the core aspect of the sound right. So this is a good example of when that happens. So this oscillator is now being modified by this LFO, and it's running through this filter 1 by default, which will just take a bit of the high end away, but we can give it the same rhythmic character. This time it's not applied to the volume of the oscillator, it's actually applying to the filter cutoff frequency. And that really makes it more convincing. As long as we understand it to be what it's supposed to be, if there's harsh components in a real sound, we can try and smoothen those out. And filters are great ways to do that. So we don't want to go too much. We don't want to choke the sound completely. just sit it there for now and see how we go. So the filter makes quite a big difference if we turn it off. And we'll turn that off for now, and we're going to use a second source to make the kind of high pitch component or the high frequency component. Otherwise it sounds just too basic. So we can, so white noise is not very pleasant by itself. So we'll try shape it with this same oscillator. And that goes a long way to selling this. Just increase the minimum volume a bit, just like we did for the sine wave. And we'll run that through filter 2. So we can modulate anything we need to, but before we go further, maybe we can try HVAC unit. Go with the HVAC, but we might choose a different filter so that we hear a bit more of its presence, maybe spread filter, and we'll just try and center it where filter 1's resonant peak is and just modulate that as well. Too much. So now we'll turn back on oscillator 1. And that's not too bad. So I'd like to move on to sort of improving this now, and I'm going to keep this short because there's a lot of things that we can do. Firstly, just a bit of EQ to tame the highs and the low lows, which especially in game, we don't really want to hear those too much because things get muddy. But we can always use a proper equalizer later. Maybe a bit of reverb, but only on the lows, just to maybe glue it together a bit. And some pitch variation would be nice because it sounds a bit stale. We could modulate the pitch here, but I actually like to use the shepherd tone and maybe randomize it here with the purlin, slow it down. So depending on where you set the morphing pitch, you've got different sorts of sounds there. They're all nice. You can actually have duplicates going on here, and you can have a lot of layers going on at once, but you can see how things can get fairly involving very quickly, and we don't want to go down any rabbit holes here. So yeah, I might just show some of the common effects that I might use on a sound like this, where it's, you know, it's trying to emulate a sort of combustion type engine, and we can synthesize it like we've just done, but it's usually a good idea to add some harmonic distortion, some drive. So I'm just targeting the higher frequencies here. We can change the crossover, but essentially this is just the higher frequencies that are being modulated. And we can ignore the low frequencies, or just, yeah, we'll ignore those. There's various tools for taking off some of that harsh edge, because nobody wants to have their ears blown off, and it's a constant battle to make sure that we got no kind of harsh transient frequencies hurting us. So you can use tools like Soothe, which is kind of like an inverse EQ, which targets frequencies to soften out. But if you go too far, it kind of starts sounding a bit like, you know, a bit kind of digitally artifacty or bubbly. So it's probably best to just stick to traditional EQ and then use Soothe after as a, you know, as a stop last resort. Always good to filter off the very low lows and high highs. FabFilter is great. We can really get specific with our frequencies, and we can make them dynamic so that they will only activate the reduction when it's reaching a certain threshold of that frequency. So yeah, FabFilter Pro Q3 is the most important tool because EQ really comes on every single sound. We can actually use this as a creative tool as well to make resonant tones and such if we wish. But yeah, there we go. I thought I would just run through the basics of how to make that type of sound. Feel free to use this as a starting point to go develop your own sounds, and I'd be really interested to know what you can come up with. So that's it. Bye for now.